Hey everybody, this is Margaret. Welcome to my channel, and you're in BookTube. Today is my long-awaited chance to talk about both Hood Feminism and Sister Outsider, books that I read in October, November, December. So, as you can see, I engaged with the text a lot, and I went back and sort of did a note-taking to see what I still remembered from those tabs and what I had thought about in the meantime. I'm just going to start with which book did I enjoy reading more, and that would be Sister Outsider. So just a little bit of background. Hood Feminism, I think, is 2018, so this is really recent, within the past year or two, and it's by Mikki, Kendall, and Audre Lorde. This is not recent. This is just a republishing. She was writing in the 70s, 80s, maybe 90s. So this is like a classic that I wanted to look after. Let's just dive into the things that I tabbed and what I was thinking when I read it. So, Hood Feminism. One of the first things I really liked was her basic needs is a feminist issue argument. I wanted to dig more into this. One of my criticisms of Hood Feminism is that it throws out ideas like this. So I was really having to grapple with rereading things to see how is this connected to this, because my mind didn't automatically process that. Another point that she had, which I agreed with, she pointed out that there was often competition between white women being seen as a source of purity and women of color being seen as sexually available. And this is when she brought up Halloween costumes that are Native inspired, and how that's not just a legacy of colonialism and defeat and sort of the conqueror's view of the history. It's also continued views of women of color, women of the Native community, being seen as sexually available and therefore being victims of sexual assault at a higher rate than white women, who are still set up as this like purity thing. Another good point is that being poor or non-white does not mean you're a bad or a worse parent than someone who is not poor and who is white. But that is an assumption that is built into the welfare system, and so that needs to be fixed. Don't need any discussion there. One of the heart-wrenching points was that the risk to obtain justice is higher for women of color. So not only is justice meted out at a different rate, but when you advocate for justice, if you are a woman of color, the risk of advocating for that justice is higher because your credibility is questioned, your resources are threatened, and you become a target. She laid out a lot of details in how that is much more dangerous for women of color, which I hadn't thought about, which is great. I didn't get this the first time I read it, but when I went back to my notes, after having read Stamped by Ibram x. Kendi and Jason Reynolds, the young adult version, not the long one, this made more sense to me. She talks about hyper-masculinizing black men and how that dehumanizes black men and doesn't help the black culture group. And the way I could think of this after listening to Stamped was that there's a different way to address that effect of white patriarchy. This is hard to explain. So white patriarchy is a thing that affects everybody, and the way it affects black men is to portray them as hypermasculine. That problem of what patriarchy has done to black men needs to be addressed separately from what white patriarchy has done to black women or women in general. And it's like the system puts us in different boxes, and so we need different solutions, and it's not something that one can't be used to negate the other because you're addressing different problems. if that makes sense. And so I finally started to see that argument. I had not heard of respectability politics, and so this is the first time I heard about, basically it's like a bigger version of blaming the victim by saying if you're not respectable, if you don't conform to all these impossible expectations of what, I don't know, someone in the 1950s might wear, do, say, believe, then you don't deserve justice. And of course, that's not what's stated in the law in the US. It's an impossible standard so that you don't have to be fair to everyone, which goes against the grain. That was a good thing a good lens to see this system and sort of bigger picture things. She says this, and so does Audre Lorde, that politics are not zero-sum. Mikki Kendall focuses on the fact that any activism is about harm reduction. So discussions and changes to the law should be about reducing harm rather than being right. This book has made me even more conscious that I need to read Are Prisons Obsolete by Angela Davis. Once again, Stamped was talking a lot about Angela Davis's career. I was just talking about this with Books by Lena's and in her comment section because, yes, listening to one thing obviously makes you leap to the next book and the next book. And this had like a little bit about Angela Davis's life, which is amazing and astounding. And so now I want to read her book even more and learn a little bit more about her life. So that's really good. It made the need for an incarceration system overhaul even more apparent, even more obvious. A lot of the issues around gentrification are difficult to parse out, but she had a really good example of the police system and how that interacts with economic change. So if you have a neighborhood that's gentrifying and you have a bunch of people who sit outside on their stoop or work on their cars in the sidewalk and talk to people a certain way because that's the culture and it's understood, and then you have people moving in because people are moving out, people are moving in, the character of the neighborhood is changing, and the culture that they bring with them is that people stay in their houses or they stay in their yards and then they don't talk to people casually unless they're invited to. Then you get someone called about sexual harassment when that was not meant, and there's sort of a culture shock of that, like icebergs screeching by each other. They're just not understanding. So that's another one of the internal culture handles things one way and intra-culture handles things a different way. And police, obviously, in this day and age, we know is not the best way to address that intraculture friction. She talked about effects on women reverberating through the lives of others, and I wanted to know more about what she meant by that. That gets back to my critique of she says a statement but then doesn't necessarily support it with details that relate exactly, and so I don't know if I agree with her. Because to me this says that like it's women's children's or people who women are supporting, and for me, I don't have children, I don't have people I'm supporting, so I'm not sure that this argument applies to women in general. I wanted some more discussion of what she means by that. Oh, and here's another bone to pick with, this is on social media too, it's not just in this book, but the phrase virtue signaling. So when I was studying, I think I got the idea that this is good because it might be a development thing or might be an economics thing. Virtue signaling means that you're modeling a virtue and you want people to repeat it, to emulate it. So like a pious person will be pious, and the person supporting their community bookstore will support the community bookstore in hopes that other people will be pious, other people will support the community bookstore. And the way it comes across in social media today is that virtue signaling is, I think it was Brene Brown that had that example about the man washing the dishes. Has he washed the dishes if his wife doesn't see him open up the dishwasher to put them away, that kind of thing? That it's more of a performative thing and that it's more a look what I did, I'm so good kind of thing, rather than just doing the work and being a good person. So I don't know what space there is, what history there is between those two ideas, whether it's a different field. And if any of y'all have experience with that, let me know. And then Sister Outsider. Okay, so Black, queer, feminist, poet. Oh, yes. This is her essays and speeches, which were late 70s, early 80s, responding to a lot of people in the media, as well as talking about her experiences traveling internationally and as part of like exploring communist and socialist countries. She had one about the USSR. She compared it to the US, and she said the US pretends it is honest and therefore it has very little room to move towards hope, which I thought was like one of those bam lines that I love to find in a nonfiction, where it just lays bare what other people take for granted as something that you cover up and you don't talk about. And it's so appropriate right now for what we're going through, because we are not having honest discussions. We're having coded discussions, and it makes it really hard to make progress, make change, move forward. People say politicians are being cynical, but if you are doing unlawful things and not acting in good faith to make yourself stay in power longer, that's not cynical. That's wrong. That's unjust, and you deserve to get kicked out of office. That's an abuse of power. So no, that's not cynicism in my definition, and I'm a writer, so I should know. More honest discussions. I love that point of Audre Lorde's. She talked a lot about differences between men and women in what is valued and not valued. And I also found this really fascinating, because she talks about women's intellectual powers being downplayed and their emotional powers being played up, so that they're kept around for men for their emotional gratification. And in our Western society, her quote says, "Feelings kneel to thoughts." And so by assigning those capabilities to the two genders that she is discussing, it's very clear that that's patriarchal. Like, feelings kneel to thoughts, women kneel to men. And so I was like, oh, that's so clear that you draw a line here and a line here. And part of what we do to counteract that is deconstruct those lines and unstitch those lines, right? The point that I was talking about with hood feminism, about putting people in different, I don't even remember what metaphor I used. Anyway, different buckets, and then addressing different problems with different solutions, she says in a different way. So the Black man is oppressed by the same system of misogyny. I use these terms interchangeably too much, and I shouldn't, but patriarchy is not the same as misogyny. I think misogyny is a subset of patriarchy, because misogyny means hatred of women, or like subordination of women, and the way you achieve that in the system that we have now is detrimental to Black men as well. I think there's like a whole, like, if you do this, then this happens, and if you do that, then that has to be true. And so there's all these contortions you have to do mentally to make this system make sense. And part of that is putting this threatening, dehumanized image on the Black man, even though it's misogyny that is creating the system, if that makes sense. This is extempore, so yeah, I these are not my expert subjects. I'm just like thinking through this, and you'll feel free to comment and help me. Here's another great point that I had not considered, because I am not in the community of Black women and Black men. But Audre Lorde points out the fact that as an oppressed community, Black women and Black men have an internal knowledge of their defenses against the white oppression. And so when you're treating these two different problems, what's dangerous is that the women and men will turn on each other, and because they have a knowledge of their defenses, they can hurt each other more. Kind of like how in a marriage, you know what hurts the other person the most, and so you speak at the wrong moment or say the wrong thing in a fit of temper, and that wounds much more than someone outside the marriage who is not as intimate would know about that person. I thought that was a really great point, and that's my metaphor to understand it. This is another point I've heard before, but bears repeating because it's been a while since I've seen it. that the system of misogyny and patriarchy that both of these Black women authors are railing against requires distrust in oneself and, like, by everybody, right? It affects everyone differently, but it keeps the white male cis Christian in power in general. To bring in a very disparate book, I read Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lorde Gottlieb, and she's a therapist, and I have a quote over my desk that says, "The inability to say no is largely about approval seeking. The inability to say yes, however, is more about a lack of trust in oneself." Boom. So I'm trying to inculcate this concept that this system, to keep it powerful in power, requires that everyone distrust themselves. It's a leap of faith to trust yourself. You gotta have communities, you gotta have networks, you gotta have knowledge base. That's the kind of virtue signaling I want to see. I want to stand by other people in that community of change makers. Really interesting processing these books, and I'm sure I'll continue processing and I'll get more Audre Lorde because there's a backlog of her stuff. Part of reading more diversely and part of continuing to grow in this discussion and show it to other people so that they can see people doing the work and engage and correct and critique and, you know, I don't know. This is what I got at the moment, so hopefully that helps or ignites some discussion. On to the next diverse read. See you next time, guys. Thanks for stopping by. Like and comment, subscribe down below. Bye.